exists because you can't just upgrade. So you can upgrade from Windows 7 to a higher version of Windows 7, like from Home Premium to Professional, and you can upgrade from Vista to Windows 7, but you can't upgrade from XP to Windows 7, and that's of course the only thing anybody wants to do. You also can't upgrade from 32 to 64-bit, which is something a lot of people like to do. So if you're going to do any of those things, you have to do a wipe and load migration task. You wipe the disk clean and install the new operating system. But what you do, of course, you don't do it in that order. First you collect the interesting information off it, then you wipe it clean, then you install the operating system, and then you put the settings back. So the end result is as if you had upgraded, but inside it's a much more complicated activity. Now you still need some installation media, and for Windows Anytime Upgrade, you don't need anything. That is, Windows Anytime Upgrade is a pure software activity where you're running Windows Home Premium. You type in Anytime Upgrade, you go to the Microsoft website, you give them some money for the credit card, and they give you a product key, and then it just upgrades to Home Premium or Professional or Ultimate right there. Because all it's doing is turning on the features that are blocked and with the new product key. You don't need a DVD, you don't need anything. That's one kind of upgrade, but that's not the kind of upgrade that companies are usually interested in. I mean, companies will buy the right version and put it out the first time. They're not going to upgrade from Pro to Ultimate, very likely. That's for home users. The Windows Upgrade Advisor will tell you if your software and hardware will survive this process. That's a website. It will scan your machine and tell you if all the stuff, what things on your machine will survive migrating from, say, XP to Windows 7. And of course, as you can imagine, quite a few of your software packages will give you warnings that they really aren't going to work exactly the same on Windows 7, although most of them would be okay, really. So side-by-side migration is the simplest, where you just move it from one computer to another or from one partition to another, so you don't have to destroy the first one to put on the second one. But that's not what most people want. Most people want to get rid of XP and use that hardware now for Windows 7. And why would you want an old thing lying around? They want wipe and load migration. So you export the user data to something else, clean install, and put the user data back. And this is all automated. So I got a few eye-clickers about that, and we'll start talking about it. In the next couple of classes talking about this more. So you have Windows XP Pro 32-bit. So how many of these can you upgrade to? Alright, there should be unanimity here, 0. You cannot get from XP to Windows 7. It doesn't matter what version you've got. That's the only thing anybody wants to do, and you can't. That's why we're doing this. That's why there's a whole new section of technology to solve this problem, which is the real business problem everybody has. Alright, you have Vista, SP1, Pro 32. How many of them can you go up to? Alright, the answer is 2, which is the popular answer. And the reason is because you cannot go from 32 to 64 with an upgrade, and you can't go to a lower version. So if you have Pro, you have to go to Pro or Ultimate. You can't go, by the way, I should have think what business, I think they called the Vista product Vista Business instead of Vista Pro. But anyway, you can only go to equal or greater versions. So these are the only 2 you can go to, Pro and Ultimate 32. And this is, of course, the most common thing. People had XP Pro, and some of them might possibly have Vista Pro, and what they want to get to is Windows 7 Pro. All right, so you have Windows 7 Home Premium 64. How many of them can you get up to? And a lot of people at this, of course, if you bought a laptop for home use, this is typically what you get. And this is the Windows Anytime upgrade case for home users. Again, the answer is 2. If you have Home Premium, you can upgrade it to Pro or Ultimate. And you can't go from 64 to 32 with an upgrade anymore. You go from 32 to 64. Not that you want to. All right. So user profiles. We talked about these before, easy transfer and USMT. So you see your profiles. If you go into advanced systems, you can see your user profiles, you can see how big they are. These are just the things in C, users, your name. C user student has a profile, and that's here, and there's default profile there. And this is what I often do in the lab when students, when the C drive gets full, because some students have been storing virtual machines on a desktop or something, I can just go in here and see which profile is 10 gigs. And then you can just delete the profile here if you like. It's a very handy thing to do. This is a simple way to restore machines to new for the next semester. If you aren't letting students install stuff, you just delete the profile, and then when you log in, it'll be a clean desktop and a clean documents and pictures and everything. It doesn't really get rid of things they've installed, but it makes it look nicer. And that's often enough in a lab where people don't have administrative privileges over the network. Otherwise, you don't re-ghost the machines for next semester. Anyway, there's your profiles. Now, local profiles are stored on a local C drive and nowhere else. So if you have another machine and you go there, you're not going to be able to log in with the same account. And even if you make an account there with the same name and password, it won't have the same My Documents folder and things in it. A roaming profile stores all that on the server. So you can go to any machine in your enterprise, log in, your password will work, and you'll get your desktop and your My Documents folder and your programs list and everything. This, of course, places a huge burden on the network. And it will be a lot of network bandwidth used up every time you log in. So you have to upgrade your network to support it, but many people do because it's really, really very nice to let everybody just log in everywhere. All right, easy transfer is moving from one machine to another. This is what you do in a sort of home environment or small enterprise to upgrade machines. You can get an easy transfer cable that goes into USB at each end and moves the settings through that. You can transfer over the network. You can stick them on some kind of portable device like a flash drive. So you start on a new computer, say this is my new computer. It will offer to install Easy Transfer on the old computer, because if it's XP, you need to install the Windows 7 version of Easy Transfer to get all the features to work. So it'll put that on a thumb drive or something. You can take it to the XP machine, then run it over there, and you've done that in the lab. Run Easy Transfer and move information from one account to another. But in domains and large networks, that's not good enough because it happens one at a time. You use Wake. The USMT is a command line tool. And so you can script it and do all of your thousands of machines all at once. It says two tools. This doesn't support side-by-side migration. It's not intended to go from one machine to another machine. It's intended to go from one machine back onto the same machine. So there's two command line tools that do this, Scanstate and LoadState. Scanstate harvests the data from the old machine, and LoadState puts it on the new machine. So this captures user accounts, OS settings, and all that jazz. It doesn't get map drives, passwords, shared folder permissions, and internet connection settings, so that's a thing to be aware of. You'll have to reconfigure those with other scripts. Maybe it should, like especially passwords would be nice, right? Why don't you take the password from the old machine and put it on a new machine, but it just doesn't. So you'll have to know. Now, it's easy enough to do that with command line, but it's a fact that this tool does not do it for you. Yeah?
Maybe it's a security problem. They don't want to know. They want you to know your password.
Well,
security problems?
I wish it was, but they've never upgraded the password storage system since 1993. They could just copy the hash and it would work just fine. So, and since they did never change it, I don't know why they didn't put it in the tool, because they said it's for backward compatibility. So you could take your password from a Windows NT 3.5 workstation and take that hash and put it in a Server 2012 server, and it would be just fine. They haven't changed a thing. But they don't. Anyway, matter of fact, I could easily write the tool to do that. But anyway, they chose not to do it for whatever reason. Maybe just to encourage you to have new passwords on your new computers, but I wouldn't do that to my users. My users will be confused enough. Let them keep their old password for a month anyway. All right, so you can do downgrades. You can do Windows 7 back down to Vista, and you do Windows XP up to Windows 7. You can't move Windows 7 back down to XP. In case you wanted to. I don't think that would happen. It's not likely that you would upgrade people to Windows 7 and say, I hate this, take me back to XP. It is, by the way, very likely if you were to migrate them from Windows 7 to Windows 8, that they would say, I hate this, and take me back to Windows 7. In fact, that's what most people say. So 8 back to 7 might be useful, but 7 back to XP is not supported, and I don't think anybody wants it. All right, so here's what the way it works. There are 4 XML files that specify how a user state migration tool works. This is the one that specifies how it's going to move applications, user settings, documents, and general config. And so this tells you about favorites, fonts, Outlook, Express, email, and so on. And if you want to move applications that Microsoft didn't think about, You'll have to add custom XML files here, typically if you're moving non-Microsoft software like Firefox and Thunderbird and whatever else you might be using. This is your rules about user settings, my documents and such. So by default, it will give you the contents of every My folder, of course, and it will give you document files on fixed volumes like doc, XLS, and PPT. They're trying to find everything you probably put there. If you have some other place you put your documents or something, then you'll have to put a setting in here to tell it to migrate it, otherwise it will be lost. Here's information about location of user documents. Here's config.xml, which is used to exclude certain files. If there are things that you don't want to move, like there might be a big file full of something really big and annoying, like videos or something, that you don't want to move to the new system. You want to throw them away, or you're going to put them on the server or something. All right, and you can modify it with this tool. So you can also reroute files. You can take them out of one folder in XP and put them in a different folder on the Windows 7 system, which is something you might very well want to do. So you can specify all these things in your custom XML file. Here's Scanstate. You can create an encrypted store. This is recommended by Microsoft because you may well have confidential information in these documents, Excel files and such, and you're going to create a folder on like a shared medium or USB stick or something, and you might lose that. So you might want to encrypt it all so that you don't have to worry about that. And so the default is to encrypt it here. You put in a key. I don't really know what kind of encryption it uses, but I would assume it's at least something like AES. Microsoft has been humiliated enough times in reasonable encryption. I think they've learned their lesson. I think most of their modern products use reasonable encryption. But I haven't looked into it to find out exactly what it does. Notice this key does have to be plain text here. So if you write a script that does the encryption, the script itself contains a secret, and you might worry about that. But you got to have a secret somewhere. And so this is, you should know the syntax of this. They do ask questions on the cert exam. So Scanstate has a path to the server where it's going to store the data. Then here's where the mygap, myuser, and config XML files are, which we talked about. And here's just encrypt with the key. So it'll put it in that folder, and you saw it when you did the lab. It makes these USMT files there. Yeah.
So file server is done with backslash?
Yeah, in 2 backslash. This is the so-called UNC path. Backslash server, backslash folder.
Then it goes /.
No, it's always, backslash is for paths to the server, // is for switches. And that's the Microsoft convention all the way since MS-DOS. Yeah, backslashes are paths, and // is for servers. This, by the way, is contrary to the RFCs from the internet, and that's why Unix users always get such an attitude. It's only / in Unix, never backslashes. The backslash has a completely different purpose, so it is quite common that when you write scripts in command line for Windows systems and move over to Linux and vice versa, bad things happen. So here's LoadState. So what you have to do, you use Scanstate and save all the settings, and you wipe the drive, you put on Windows 7, and you also have to install all the applications. If you're bringing back in your Firefox settings and you haven't installed Firefox yet, it won't work. So you install the OS, you install all the applications, and then you bring in all the settings you saved with LoadState, which is just the same kind of syntax. You tell it what folder contains your stuff. If it had a key, you've got to give it a decrypt key, and it has to have mygap and myuser. So there's 3 kinds of stores. There's an uncompressed store, which will just make a copy of all the files up there the way you would, by just dragging them. And then you can even go on the share, if it's not encrypted, and just go through the files. That's the simplest way to do it. You can compress it, just so it gets smaller on the server, just one file if you want to, and you can encrypt it. There's one cool trick called a hard link. This is what you do if you want to upgrade an XP machine to, well, I should say if you want to migrate an XP machine to Windows 7, and you don't have any network or a USB drive or anything, you want to do it all alone, this will actually create a temporary partition, copy all this stuff into that partition, reinstall the OS, and move it back over from that temporary partition, which is kind of cool. It uses some temporary storage on the drive itself. They call that hard link. And I think, by the way, what I've heard said in Microsoft documents that don't quite know how it works is it actually doesn't move the files, it links to them where they exist and sets aside that space and installs around it. I'm not quite sure how it works. When I thought about that, that didn't make so much sense to me. But anyway, that's the point here. And this supposedly saves time because it doesn't actually move the files. It just remembers where they were. Anyway, there's offline migrations. You can boot with some kind of pre-executable environment. Then you make a PE disk with the user state migration tool on it. So you boot from the CD or DVD, and you're hard disk is not in use because you're going to be wiping it out. Yet you have not only the minimum to start the system, but you've added the user state migration tool to that disk. So you've got it. Then you can run Scanstate on this machine. Now this is what you do if you don't have administrator access to the disk. You boot from the CD. This is one of the fundamental weaknesses of Microsoft operating system, an important thing to know, and it's true of Linux, true of anything else, is if you have any kind of security on the disk, you can ignore it by booting from the CD. Then the disk is not running, the operating system is not running, and you can just read and write the bits on the file. The only thing that prevents you from doing anything to any computer by booting from the CD is a BIOS password that will stop you from booting from the CD, or encrypting the whole hard drive with something like BitLocker. If you don't do those things, then anybody can do anything to that disk by just booting to a USB or CD. So that's what you do here. So then, as long as you don't hit BitLocker, you can copy anything you want off that drive. There's one way to do it. Now, the load state has to be run from inside the running Windows 7 because you've got to have it running with all your applications available, and it imports all that stuff. But you can copy states from a machine that's not using the hard drive if you want to. The other way you could do it, of course, is you could have the original XP running and run Scanstate inside XP. That's why they gave you the ability, when you started on the target machine, to copy the USMT back to the XP machines. You could run it inside XP. You could do it that way, but then you'd have to be the administrator if you want to capture all the accounts. Because only the administrator can go on other people's accounts. Booting from a CD would be another way to elevate yourself to administrator. So, which tool is used to put the settings on a new machine? Which command line tool? That's right. I modified that this morning to show there's only one right answer. All right, and that's LoadState. Scanstate collects them and LoadState dumps them. I don't think these words are terribly easy to remember, but that's the way it is. LoadState is the one that puts it on the new machine. And these are not command line tools. That's a cable. All right, which tool can only be used in a domain? All right, and that is Windows Deployment Services, WDS. We talked about it earlier. We haven't covered it yet. You're not going to have any projects in it because I didn't want to give you projects where you had to have a domain. But that's what you use in a domain instead of WIC. All right, and I realize it's sort of confusing stuff. I found it pretty confusing at first. I want you to get started getting used to it because we're all going to have to know this soon enough. All right, so which tool collects the settings from the old computer? When I first learned this, I sort of rebelled and thought it was just alphabet soup and nonsense. I gradually got used to it. All right, and that's Scanstate. There we are. More people got it. And all right, if you want to convert from Windows XP to Windows 7 without using an external drive, how do you do it? All right, so that's what they call hard link. The hard link system is the one that uses files, uses just one drive, saves the files somehow temporarily on the drive, and then puts them back after the operating system is replaced. All right, pretty convenient for home users. I don't think you want to do it in business very much. All right, so let me just point out, there is another, even if you're not going to get Microsoft certification exam, there's another potential motivation for doing this stuff, which is to get out of the final. So Some people, for example, have already done everything. Here's the scores. You will find